Welcome to Life Beyond Abortion, the podcast where we delve into the untold stories and experiences surrounding abortion. Stories often missing from everyday conversations, media reports, and even other podcast interviews. I'm your host, Melissa Ohden, the founder and CEO of the Abortion Survivors Network. As the author of You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir, and Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence, I've had the privilege of hearing the most powerful stories from some of the most resilient and courageous individuals. These stories and these people have profoundly transformed my life, and I believe they have the power to transform yours as well. Together, we will amplify these voices, share the truths that they illuminate, and challenge our culture to recognize what life is truly like beyond abortion. Thank you for tuning in for this episode of Life Beyond Abortion, the podcast where we really delve into the stories, the voices, the experiences of what life is really like behind the word abortion. Today, I am thrilled to have a friend in the pro-life movement, someone whose experiences blows me away in terms of resilience and what she has now done with what she has gone through in her life. I want to introduce you to my friend, Melissa Manion, on this episode of Life Beyond Abortion. Melissa, thanks for joining me.
Oh, Melissa, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah, I was thinking the other day, it's been, it hasn't been a whole year since I've seen you at a march. I mean, maybe.
March for Life in Connecticut. Yes, thank you for coming out for us. That was amazing to have you.
I've been watching that, Pennsylvania had their March for Life recently. And yeah, Connecticut's that was a good
It was the
time.
beginning of the year. Yes, yeah. So we had a really great turnout. I was really happy. It's hard to say what will happen in Connecticut. A lot of the pro-lifers here are a little more quiet than other parts of the country. So I feel like it was great to have you, and we had a lot of people that day. So that was really exciting.
Yeah, it was a great turnout. And I mean, I think that's something super encouraging. I think for people to recognize is, hey, there are pro-life people in Connecticut, and there are more people that are pro-life that are quote unquote quiet than we think.
Yeah, oh yes, yes, definitely, and it has been really nice over the last few years to see a bit of a shift here in Connecticut. I think it's probably because our laws are starting to be a little more. I don't know whether you want to call it extreme or lax. I guess it depends on what side of the road you're standing on. But I think that even people that might have considered themselves a little more moderate on the issue, I'm finding are starting to be concerned with the direction that our state has headed with the legalization of abortion pretty much up until birth for any reason, anytime. We have no minor parental consent or even notification. It's kind of the Wild West out here.
Yeah, the Wild West for sure. But there are, normal, everyday people who stand up and, whether it's at the pregnancy center, out on the sidewalk, right, influencing policy, writing, being an advocate, everybody can do something. And I'd love to really start there with you because I know you well enough to know your experience and how that's led you to this place. But, when we talk about life existing beyond the word abortion, I would love for you to share with this audience, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity to share. And I would first say I never thought that it could really. For me, the way that I sort of described my abortion initially was that it was the nail in the coffin of my belief that I was pretty worthless, which I know sounds really dire, and also was just kind of my reality. Although I did have a decently loving family. There was a lot of abuse and neglect and such things that led me down roads to looking for love in all of the wrong places. And so I already, prior to having my abortion, did not have the best best outlook of myself or my future. And so to me, that was, like I said, the nail in the coffin. Um, but to back up a little bit, I was 19 actually the first time that I became pregnant. And I was what you could say a poster child for abortion. I was addicted to drugs, heavy drugs. I was in an abusive relationship. I didn't really have anything to speak of. I was, living with my mom, and I was scared to death. However, I always knew that life was life. I was brought up loosely Catholic, so it really wasn't from a religious standpoint per se. I think it honestly was just that I knew that there was a baby, a human being that was formed at conception. I never questioned that. And so to me, I had no option. Not that I wanted an option, but I was having a baby and I was just going to have to figure it out, which has sort of proved to be a theme of my life. And so my son was born in December of 1995. I'd like to say that he is turning 30 this year and finishing up his master's program down in Tampa, and I could not be more proud. We have definitely defeated all the odds. It's amazing. It's amazing. And so um, I would love to be able to say, oh, I had him and then life just drastically changed and everything was wonderful. But unfortunately, that's not how life often goes. And so it took me a couple more years. He was about 3 years old when I finally left that relationship, knew that it was not healthy. I was likely not going to survive if I stayed for lots of reasons. And so I immediately, as one does, jumped into another relationship with a young man that I had known from high school. And 3 months later, found myself pregnant again. Um, Terrified, I thought, oh my gosh, what on earth am I going to do now? I'm just finally starting to get on my feet. I'd gotten my own place. I'd gotten a job. I was going to school. And so I didn't know. I was scared to death. However, this young man was absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. He did and said everything right, everything that you would want a young man to do when you find yourself in an unplanned pregnancy. Told me that he loved me, told me he wanted to marry me, told me that he was going to be there for me, for the baby, and showed that for about a month. Um, and then one day, I just got scared. I got scared. I went to a friend's house. I was lamenting to her that I didn't love him. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life with him. I was still, regardless of the fact that it was an abusive relationship, I had been in it for 7 years. So I was still in love with my son's father. I was just, my mind was just swirling and swirling and swirling. And she had had an abortion in high school. And I knew she did. And I knew that we couldn't talk about it ever in all the years that we were friends. But it did come up that day. And essentially, for the sake of time, I just changed my mind. I changed my mind and I ran home. I called Planned Parenthood, and because of the gestational age that I was at, I was just into my second trimester. I needed to get in immediately. And so within 2 days, they had me in there for a surgical abortion. And not only did I lose my baby, um, it nearly ended my life, the course of events from that moment on. And also that day when I made that phone call from home to Planned Parenthood, I then waited on my couch for the baby's father to come back to our apartment that we were sharing at the time because I had moved him in. And I looked him in the face and I told him that I was having an abortion and essentially there was nothing that he could do about it. And I don't remember exactly what he said to me that day, but I will never forget the look of sheer terror on his face as he just literally begged me and pleaded with me to not do that. And unfortunately for him, it was my body, my choice. And in that moment, I believed those lies. So that's where it all began.
And I appreciate you sharing all of that because it's very vulnerable to share these experiences with anyone. And nonetheless, even in a podcast interview, I know this is not the first time you've done it, but I mean, this is why I have this podcast because I don't believe that we have enough of these opportunities in our culture to say, hi, could you lean in for just a minute? because I want to share with you what I know about abortion. I want to tell you what happened in my life. And I do believe that us sharing vulnerable stories does create this space where people are going to enter in to the tension that exists between what you've experienced, what I've experienced, and what this narrative is about abortion in our culture. You know,
Absolutely.
I'm wondering, Melissa, you had mentioned, that you knew your friend had had an abortion and you didn't talk about it. But yet, right, even though you didn't talk about it, it came up.
It
And I
did.
think that's
It
a
did.
really interesting dynamic for us to identify exists, which is, and I had it in my own life with friends as well, and even family members, where I know there's been an abortion experience, and there are either spoken or unspoken rules of we don't talk about that, and it's hard to navigate that sometimes, especially in different seasons of your life. I think it's super hard for young people to navigate that. But then I think that the dynamic that I find interesting that I would love your feedback about is, so we don't talk about it because we're expected to sort of tiptoe and, mind your business. But
Yep.
then it enters into the conversation. And this had a life changing impact for you
Yeah.
and your preborn baby. And so I'm curious where you sit with that now of, so we don't talk about it, but it comes up and it's incredibly influential.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting question that I haven't had the opportunity to share on. So I actually really appreciate this, Melissa. Um, so it took me a very long time, excuse me, to even start to process and think about that piece, because to me, immediately, it was my fault. And I still feel that way very strongly, that at the end of the day it was my decision to make, and I made it. And also, um I think that it is interesting to look at in that way, that this friend of mine quite literally could not speak of her abortion. Every year on the anniversary, she would just cry and cry and cry, and didn't want anyone consoling, didn't want to talk to anyone about it, was kind of just off the radar for the day. And yet, in this moment of weakness, um, it comes up, like you said. And I think that the larger issue isn't so much. I know some people in comment sections of various places that I've shared this story have liked to kind of attack her. And I don't want that to be the takeaway. I don't want the whole misery loves company. Although I would be remiss to not suggest that that does come into play. It's just human. It's just human nature. It's actually in all of us, and I would challenge anyone that thinks not, because the Bible is very clear that we all fall short of the glory of God, and so I don't want that to be the message. What I think more so that I would like to get across is that at this time when this was happening in the mid 90s, um, no one was talking about abortion. Certainly not. I had never, like I said, my stance on abortion didn't come from a religious background. It truly didn't. Although I, like I said, was loosely Catholic. I really, if I'm totally honest, was not paying much attention to them at all. If I'm honest. Thank God for God though, because he was surely paying attention to me all along. And so it wasn't from that, and I didn't have a family that ever talked. I don't ever remember talking about it. It was just, to me, frankly, common sense. And so um I think the only people that essentially were talking about it were the people, I suppose, who were still just very excited that we had Roe, right? They're like, yay, finally women can do what they want with their bodies. And, my body, my choice was what was huge. That was the only one. We didn't have health care and empowerment and all these sorts of things then. Interesting. Um, and so it was either that or sort of this silent sect of people that just weren't discussing it at all. And most definitely, abortion healing were two words that I didn't even know went together. And so I more look at it now from a space that, um, and subsequently our relationship never like really ended. I did move from where I was living, and so distance and all sorts of other things came into play. But all these years I've often hoped that she would maybe um, reach out to me. I've tried to reach out to her because I want her to find the healing that she never had. And what I will say is that hurt people do hurt people, and they don't mean to most often. I know that in my worst and darkest days, there were a lot of people that I hurt. And if I could go back and do it all over again, I would do none of it. I would certainly do none of it. It was never my intention in any of my ills, honest to goodness, to hurt someone else. If anything, I thought the only person I was hurting was me. That's how self-focused I was. And so, really, I think the message is that there is hope and there is healing. And it is where the Lord says in the Bible that He has exceedingly and abundantly more for us than we could ever ask, think, or imagine. Whenever I share my testimony, this has become the cry of my heart, that I want women who have had abortions to know that it's not the end. It does not have to define them. It will cause you pain in some way, shape, or form, probably for the rest of your life, because I can't imagine. I mean, I lost a child. I lost my daughter, who I named, and was able to find healing with. And also, I will never have her. Actually, as a matter of fact, this necklace has 5 hearts on it for my 5 children. My husband bought that for me. And the one in the middle is my sweet Ruthie Jean. And so there will always be pain. However, the freedom that I have found through Christ, I want for my friend, because if she had found that freedom prior to having that conversation with me, I assure you and anyone listening, there is no way that anyone would ever, 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 ever even think to suggest abortion to someone that they cared about, or frankly, even someone that they don't like, because it is detrimental forever.
I mean, that's the key takeaway right there. If someone has experienced abortion and they've experienced healing, they would not be recommending that to someone else. I mean, slap that on a bumper sticker, right? That is a key takeaway. And I say that all the time, Melissa, is, for our nation to finally have a culture of life restored, it starts in our families. It starts with us individually to heal
Amen.
ourselves and address the family dynamic. And then we start moving that circle outwards, right, to address issues within our churches, within our schools, within our communities. That's why we see states like Connecticut, who sometimes look so wacky. And it's like, now this isn't just a New England thing, right? This is what happens when we have 50 years nearly of legalized abortion, and
Yes.
hurt people and are doing the best they can with what they have. But what they have is a life and a family that has been changed by abortion. And so we see this incredible trickle down effect,
Domino
except
effect. Yes.
God. So I want to hear that story of how do you go from that place to where you are now.
Yeah, it's miraculous. It really truly is. Because as I said, that was the nail in the coffin. I thought there was no way I'm coming back from this. And I just sort of continued down a path of destruction. As a matter of fact, I overdosed just a few short months later, ended up in the hospital, surviving by the grace of God, by the grace of a God that, frankly, I barely even knew. Um, and, thankfully, my life was spared. I made the decision to move, to change things. Um, but immediately got myself in another relationship that was hands down the most abusive relationship of my life. I have an amazing, wonderful daughter, though, from that relationship, so I wouldn't change a thing. And a grandbaby now, too. So God is good and He is gracious. And so, in the midst of all of that, when I finally left that 7-year relationship, um, I I would like to say I found God, but really He found me. There's a verse in the Bible that says, "I chose you." It literally says that, "I chose you before the beginning of time," and I allowed my heart. The Lord allowed my heart, however you want to phrase it. He drew me into Himself, and initially I remember praying and saying, Lord, forgive me for this. I don't really remember exactly how it went because I was absolutely terrified of all the things that I had ever done in my life. And believe me, there was a long laundry list. I can relate to many people with many sinful pasts, addiction and abuse and all kinds of things. And God has been good in all of it, truly. But in this particular situation, um, I remember thinking, okay, well, I know intellectually, although I didn't realize that at the time, that you have forgiven me. And so we're just going to move on and we're just not going to talk about it. And that was the way that I wanted it to be because I, as many, many other women that I have spoken to, felt like abortion is truly the ultimate sin. I mean, what could be worse than intentionally taking the life of your own child? Because that is what abortion is. There's really no way to sugarcoat it. At any gestation, at any age, you are ending the life of your unborn child in what should be the safest place for that baby to be. And so to me, there was no greater sin. And so I was just sort of hoping for the best, that this whole forgiveness thing was real and that it wasn't going to prohibit me from a life of eternity with my Lord. And also, let's just not talk about it. And so we talked about lots of things all the time. And weights came off, and it was just absolutely amazing couple of years. And then all of a sudden, I was driving down the street one day and audibly heard in my mind the Holy Spirit speaking to me and said, we're going to walk through this now, and then you're going to go out and help others. To which I abruptly said, no way. No way, God. Like, here's my Rolodex. We could talk about all of these things, but please not that.
Yep, I can name you 50 other things that we could talk about, but that one, no, 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 no.
We're not doing that. Remember, I tucked that away under my bed. And but God, again, in his graciousness and his goodness, he just continued to call me, and he drew me to all sorts of people and places and things over the next year or so that once and for all led me to Clearway Clinic in Springfield, Massachusetts, where I met the amazing Kelly Wilcox, who was used to be the executive director, and I walked through a Save One program, Sheila Harper's program, and my life literally changed. I mean, just it's never been the same. It's never been the same.
And I mean, God wasn't done there yet. So you go through your first healing program, and
Yeah.
now you're doing more things with that after you've gone through healing.
Oh my gosh, it's been an amazing ride. It really has. Um, I began just sort of helping other women who found themselves either in an unplanned pregnancy situation or were post-abortive like myself. I connected and partnered with various pregnancy resource centers, both in Massachusetts and Connecticut. From there, I got hooked up with Embrace Grace, which is one of my absolute favorite organizations out there. I've been helping to spread the word. We don't have a lot of New England chapters, so anyone in New England that's listening or watching this, please think about that. Look up Embrace Grace and start a chapter. Anyone can do it. And I'll tell you what, the church was the last place that I would have gone when I had myself in either one of my pregnancies, to be honest. And their program is just incredible. And so from there, I ended up sharing my story through Live Action. They published my original abortion story. Michelle Williams, when she was getting her Golden Idol Emmy, I mean, literally, like how much more obvious could it be? This Golden Idol that she stood up there and said, I wouldn't have if it were not for my right to choose, just lit a fire under me. And I thought, I can't just sit here and let these lies continue to permeate our society. I have to say something. I have to do something. And God gave me the strength, even in my weakness, like his verse says, I will boast about my weaknesses so that his strength can remain. And we were kind of off to the races. And since then, the Lord has just opened doors. I've partnered with Let Them Live. I've partnered with Save the Storks. My entire story and the piece about the father, I wrote an open letter after. That took about 3 years for me to really be able to get through it. And as I was launching my website for speaking events, the Lord, again, clearly I heard, write the letter. And I just thought, oh, Lord, I've been trying for years. But this time it just poured out of me. and I was able to speak it at the steps of the Supreme Court at the March for Life a couple years ago. It's just been, like I said, just, I can't believe it. I cannot believe that the Lord took what was meant to destroy me, right? I don't know why I can't believe it, because it's also in his word, what is meant to destroy me, and used it for my good. He turned the enemy on his head, and I have been able to just walk alongside women and men who either, like I said, are struggling with a pregnancy decision, which I believe I said this, but let them live. Emily Burning is one of my best friends now. There's just so many ways to truly help women. And so on that note, you know, the pro-choice side, I've always found rather interesting that it seems that the choice that they negate is actually being a parent. Because Planned Parenthood doesn't do anything to help you if you want to have your baby. I mean, newsflash. There's no prenatal vitamin, there's no prenatal care, there's no OBGYNs that are going to deliver your baby. So the majority of the pro-choice help is really to get an abortion. And so it's just, it's a larger conversation, much like we were talking about earlier. And so the role that I have now is to just come alongside these people. As far as I am concerned at this point, there is no excuse whatsoever. Not that there ever should have been, but even more so to say to a woman that you need to sacrifice the life of your child in order to have a future and a hope for that future, because that is a lie, truly from the pit of hell. As a matter of fact, the Lord says the exact opposite. He says, I have good plans for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. And so that is what I stand on. I stand on his strength and his hope every day that he provides me with an opportunity to share. I say, okay, and I show up and I do it, and I just let him do the rest.
Right. And be blessed by it. But I would love to hear from you directly, because I know there must be something about our name that makes us a little bit fiery about these things.
Honeybee, did you know that?
I know, we're so sweet.
What are you gonna get the sweet, or are you gonna get the sting?
Obviously. Melissa, as we're talking about so many pieces related to healing that I think are incredibly important, I think we also need to kind of address the elephant in the room, which is, like you said, in many ways, you were the quote unquote poster child for abortion. And, we live in a culture that somehow would say that given the circumstances of your life, abortion was the best option on the table for you, or that women in today's world should be default, right, leading that charge to pursue that choice. So what would you say to people who would say, Melissa, yeah, you are the epitome of why abortion should be a choice, full stop?
Yeah, I wish I could say that that's never actually been said to my face. That would be nice. I think it's disgusting. And I think that it is the exact opposite of true feminism and true support for women, true empowerment for women. To me, it's mind-boggling that the same people that would suggest that we need to, and they are absolutely right, that we need to help the poor, the less fortunate, the addicts, the single moms, the minorities, are the same people that are that are saying very loudly that those same people aren't worthy of being parents, and or conversely, even if they are, that they're setting themselves up for a life of destitute. And to me, that is disgusting, actually. It's absolutely abhorrent. Women are amazing and amazingly capable. And when women come together, we are a force to be reckoned with, which is one of the reasons why I love Emily and Let Them Live so much, because what we need to do is to help and love and support these women. Death is not the answer to better life. It never will be. It never has been. That will never change. What we need to do are truly come together, in the most bipartisan way, because it's very simple. Everyone benefits. Love, support, and encourage women to bring forth the life that is already in existence in their womb and show them that they can do it. Raise up a whole next generation, maybe to think a little more wisely about the choices that they make. Because the overwhelming majority of us that were having abortions, pretty close to 90%, were elective. We just didn't want to be a mom. The reality of it is, we should have thought about that before we engaged in the one and only activity that can cause that to happen. And so maybe if we start reframing and we actually allow these types of conversations without condemnation and judgment, and I mean, I'm called a hypocrite on the daily. On the daily, people will say, oh, so you had an abortion, you exercised your right to abortion, and now you want to take it away from other people. And frankly, sometimes I want to say, I'm glad you're paying attention. Because yes, actually, I do. I do. Because it's not the answer. It is not the answer. And we need to do better. We need to do better.
Well, and that is, I mean, you've gone full circle from what we talked about earlier, which was if a woman has had an abortion and has found healing, she would never be recommending that for another person. So look at you with your consistent life ethic. You're nailing it.
Go figure, right?
I know that about
Absolutely.
you.
Absolutely.
And you're so right. It is common sense at the end of the day.
It really should be. And I would even say, which is a whole nother episode, but I have a pretty strong belief that some of our most loud and vocal and frankly angry pro-choice ladies are post-abortive women who have not found that healing. I'd stake my life on it, honestly.
Policymakers as well.
Yes.
You know, I love that you have been both incredibly vulnerable and so very wise in this episode. That's exactly why I wanted you on it, because I knew that you would bring both of those things to the table. But if people want to know more about you and that letter that you wrote and, you know, your activism, your writing, where can they go to find you, Melissa?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. I do have a website. It is my name, melissamanion.com. And also I do most of my online stuff on Instagram. And then I click it over to my Facebook basically. But I love engaging. That's what I want to let people know. Also, I am incredibly approachable. Please, if anything that I've said has touched you in any way, please reach out to me. Really, I'd love to have a conversation, no matter which side of the aisle you're on, as long as you would like to keep it civil. That'd be nice.
Right. If you are willing to have a respectful conversation, the Melissas are always here to have that conversation.
Yes, we are.
Well, thank you again for joining me. I appreciate all that you do for life, not just in Connecticut, but truly across our country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa. It's been wonderful talking with you.
And thank you, audience, for tuning in to this episode of Life Beyond Abortion. I hope that you were both encouraged and challenged by Melissa and what she had to share today. And I hope that, you know, if you or someone you know have been impacted by abortion, you take those steps to pursue healing in your life. And if you want to get engaged, right, follow some of Melissa's steps. You know, learn more about what she's writing, share that, get involved with Embrace Grace, get involved with a local, you know, healing group. There are just so many ways that you can make a difference and be a part of the solution and, right, changing and shifting this conversation about abortion in our culture.
Life Beyond Abortion is a podcast presentation of the Herzog Foundation. The views and opinions on the show are those of the host and her guest, and not necessarily those of the Herzog Foundation. You can find out more about Melissa's work at melissaohden.com or by following her on Instagram at Melissa Ohden. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show so that you never miss an episode of Life Beyond Abortion.